Hey guys, just a quick editor's note. I did not mention at the beginning of this podcast that this will also be on Spotify. For those of you that don't like video podcasts, I am working on getting it up on Spotify. I'm pretty sure the podcast name will be Words from the Nerds. If you just want to look that up on Spotify, the audio version will be there, and the video version will be here on YouTube. And with that, enjoy the video. Welcome everybody to my very first podcast and my very first podcast episode and my very first YouTube video. I am here with Ben from Aspire Entertainment. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ben. I am one of the people who runs the Aspire Entertainment YouTube channel and TikTok and everything. And I met Aiden. We started talking, and we've just had a blast discussing different new releases and different stuff with podcasting and YouTube. So we decided that we wanted to do this awesome series together, and I'm definitely very glad to be here.
Awesome, man. And this is the Road to Kenobi. As we all know, the Kenobi series first episode will come out May 27th. So we decided to watch the prequels and break down every episode one, two, and three, leading to Kenobi to see if we can catch anything and catch some callbacks when the show comes out. So I guess we'll get into it. So Ben, I want to know, what are your initial thoughts on this movie?
Yeah, it was really interesting rewatching this film because I haven't watched the entirety of the prequel trilogy in a long time. I I mainly grew up watching episodes 2 and 3. That was like a big part of my childhood. So I don't even remember the last time I watched episode 1. So it was interesting because now that we've gotten obviously like the sequel trilogy and also with Solo and Rogue One and all these shows, we know so much more, and it's kind of fascinating to see some of the foundation that was laid in this movie for things that I totally didn't remember when I like would have first watched the movie however many years ago. So it was an interesting experience for that regard, seeing like how everything builds up throughout the series because I didn't remember all of that foundation. But I think even though like it was a part of my childhood, that watching it now, I can recognize a lot more of the faults with the movie. I still think that it was fun and like story wise, it did what it should do. But there were a lot of issues that I had watching through it this time, and things that I definitely don't remember from like when I would have watched it the last time. So it was interesting to get almost like a whole new perspective now that I've seen more of the other films and just like had more experiences with Star Wars. Rewatching this one, it's just almost shines a new light on it now that I know what I do about everything else.
Yeah, I totally agree. It also holds a lot more emotional weight to it, I found. It has been a while for me also since I've last watched episode one. But yeah, it holds a lot of emotional weight with it, knowing how everything plays out, knowing how episode three plays out. There's a lot of cool things in there and a lot of sad moments that you know it's inevitable, Anakin turns. You know it's inevitable. Qui-Gon dies, and so seeing a lot of that build up was I, I can't remember. I think it was a couple years ago I watched Phantom Menace, and I actually watched Phantom Menace, and then I watched the rest of the Star Wars movies. So going back on it, yeah, there's a lot of stuff I caught. Was there anything in particular that kind of, I guess let's start with the negatives. Let's get the negatives out of the way. Was there anything in particular you did not like?
There was a couple things. Some of them like really were just minor nitpicks, but the biggest thing that I noticed like throughout was the pacing felt very weird because it cut between so many scenes like constantly. Like there was always three or four things going on at once, and it felt like every time they would cut between these, we would only get like 1 or 2 minute scenes, and then it would go back to wherever it was before. So it just felt like it felt kind of all over the place, and that happened like throughout the entirety of the movie, at least for me, where like the constant classic Star Wars editing technique of like the wipes that they would do and everything, that just felt like it was happening so often. Like I for me at least, it was just jumping from one thing to the next, and the pacing just felt like really inconsistent. It didn't like detract too much. It's a weird style, I guess. Like it was just so much more noticeable when I watched it. Do you think that that was the case with the pacing?
Yeah, I totally agree. One moment that stands out to me was the Duel of the Fates fight with Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan. I noticed, watching that fight, I didn't realize how much times they cut away from it to show Padme fighting off the droids. And I just remember thinking the whole time, like, okay, get us back to the the big fight, get us back to Duel of the Fates. We all know, I have here that is probably, in my opinion, the best choreographed lightsaber fight in Star Wars, apart from Ahsoka and Darth Maul in the Clone Wars. So seeing that fight go on, and then just seeing it for a couple minutes, cutting away to a shootout, and then cutting back to it a couple minutes later, I had a big problem with that.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said that there were times where there would be like three or four things going on. I'm pretty sure that towards the end of the movie, we had the Duel of the Fates going on. We had Padme they were trying to like have the surprise attack, and then there was also the Battle of Naboo, and there
Yeah,
was also Anakin who had just flown off in the Naboo fighter out to the Trade Federation ship.
yeah,
All four of these things happening at once, and like they were all just cut together, and it was so much because you're right, like Duel of the Fates is such a high, especially for just like this whole franchise, and it is such a great duel, like lightsaber duel. And yeah, I definitely like, I almost feel like in my head, which maybe this is exactly what you just said, but in my mind going into it, I was like, okay, we're getting to this duel. I'm so excited. But then it would be like a minute or two of that and then back to some other stuff for a while. And
yeah,
it's just like not what I remembered, I guess, from my childhood viewings of the movie. So it was definitely frustrating in that regard.
yeah. I totally agree. Another nitpick I have was, I get the movie was made in like the early 2000s. I can't remember, is it 1999, or was it another year that this movie was made?
It was 99 because I'm pretty sure
99,
the prequels came out in 99, 2002, and 2005. So it's
5, right?
3 years in between them.
Okay, so I'll give that to them. The CGI wasn't amazing back then. They weren't as advanced as we are now. I'll give that to them. But the practical effects looked so good. They looked amazing. But I feel like we got way more CGI than we got practical effects, and I don't understand why, because like I said, they look great. Like Jar Jar Binks is just fully CGI'd, and you can very well tell at some points. But then the Viceroy, full practical effects, and he looks amazing. So, did you notice any of that?
So yeah, that would have been my like second biggest nitpick was the visuals just being inconsistent because even some of the CGI was decent, passable for the time. I do think the issue was the overuse of it, and I know that's a criticism that like people give the entire prequel trilogy is like after what we got in the original trilogy, where back then there wasn't that technology, and most of what you saw was like real, and the techniques that they used were incredible, and to now it's surprising to me, like even just Anakin flying in a Naboo starfighter out into space, how looking at a shot like that, it looks worse than when there were like TIE fighters and X-Wings flying in the Death Star back in A New Hope. And that is like a 20-year difference.
Yeah,
And so I think, yeah, the overuse of CGI is definitely shown here, especially considering like even a show like The Mandalorian with Moff Gideon's
yeah,
ship and the Razor Crest, where they went back to the practical route. It's just such a stark contrast when they do full CG and when they try to do full CG characters like Jar Jar or like Sebulba and some of the other
yeah,
pod racers. Like it definitely is lacking. It was ambitious, but
yeah,
the technology was not quite there to do full CG characters in the way that they tried to do.
yeah. Totally agree. Not only was was Jar Jar hard to look at. He was hard to listen to and hard to watch. I found him very unbearable. I get he was supposed to be the comedic relief, but at times I just found myself thinking, back to Jar Jar. What do you think of that?
Yeah, and I have you heard of the I guess like controversy behind the actor who
Yeah,
did Jar Jar? Like that to
yeah,
me was really sad when I heard about that. I don't know if you can maybe speak more on that because I don't know too much. I just know
yeah,
like that the hatred from the Star Wars fandom had a huge effect on the actor who did the motion capture for Jar Jar,
yeah.
and I do think that's sad, but you're right that the like I no offense to the guy because I
Oh
think
yeah, no,
he did a great job for what he was given. He very much created like his own character and the way he was able to embody that. I think he did exactly what he was supposed to do.
yeah,
I just feel like, yeah, the character's addition was not a great one. And yeah, annoying at times and even just like confusing at times. Like when Jar Jar was put in charge of the army, the Gungan army to lead the
uh,
attack, and then just like it's just flailing and so clumsy and everything. It's so weird. It
yeah,
just it feels strange in the Star Wars universe and
yeah.
in comparison to the other storylines that we get here. It just feels out of place almost. It's just the unnecessary comedic addition to this movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think at some point, touching on the controversy, you have to separate the actor from the character. And not even that, like in this case, he was just a stand-in, he did what he was supposed to do. He walked around in the practical effects suit. And I mean, I might be totally wrong. Do you know he didn't voice Jar Jar, did he?
I am not sure about that. I
Yeah,
actually don't know.
I have no idea. I mean, even if he did, you separate the actor from the character. It's not his fault that the dialogue in the prequels is kind of rough at times. I think we can all agree on that. But speaking on separating the actor from the character, another character in this movie had that same problem, and that's Jake Lloyd. Jake Lloyd, sorry, who played Anakin. Um, do you know a little bit about that?
The I don't know too much about it, but what I have seen is I think I saw an interview with George Lucas
Hmm.
where he talked about how people shouldn't hate on Jake Lloyd for his performance because he did exactly what he was asked to do. And I
Yeah.
think that's true. Like for being a child actor and for what he gave, he did what he was supposed to do, regardless of if now we would look at it and say that he had cheesy dialogue or terrible acting.
Yeah.
But if there's any more controversy or something like that, I'm not too sure, not too familiar with it.
Yeah, I just know that he faced a lot of backlash from Star Wars fans for his performance and his role, and he also, I think he got into like some legal trouble a little bit after. I think his mugshots are all over. So, prayers to both of them. No one should have to go through that. And especially because I loved little Anakin's performance. I thought he was one of my favorite parts of the movie. So, before we get into that, was there any other criticisms you had with this movie you wanted to touch on?
There was one minor thing, and that was the and I know it's such a small part of the movie, but it stood out. The first sort of mini duel between Qui-Gon versus Darth Maul when they're just on Tatooine, that was like to me, especially compared to, Duel of the Fates, that to me was really underwhelming and like it's not even that it was just like boring in comparison, but even some of like the shots and the close-ups and the quick cuts like it I just didn't find it to be like an engaging fight. But I know that's such like a small
Yeah.
nitpick. It was just something that I noticed when watching.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see that. One more minor one that found. This one's more of a funny one. In my notes, I have three laughing faces by this one. It happens fairly early into the movie. It's the Force speed. We see Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan kind of just like
Oh,
turn into the Flash and just dip out. I couldn't help but
oh
laugh
my gosh.
because not only is that the only time we see it in this movie, that's the only time we see it in all of Star Wars. So that was a very like, what the heck kind of moment. But yeah,
I remember, I think it was probably within the last couple of months where I saw a clip going around on TikTok and people were saying like, I can't believe that this was in the movie. And I watched it and I'm like, is that real? Like, is that real? That happened? And now like watching it, like, yeah, that was such a wild decision. Like it was crazy.
It's so laughable. I mean, when I was typing it up, I put three laughing faces. I was like, "This is, it's amazing. It's just, it's something else, man. Especially because it never came back. After like we had like what, eight more episodes after this. Maybe like if you take out the original three, that's like five more episodes we had after episode one that we never saw it come back. So yeah, that was pretty funny. All right, well, if that wraps up all the negatives, I guess we should start getting into what we loved about this movie. You want to take us away?
There's a lot of things that are good about this movie. The thing that I loved most is the final duel,
Yeah,
and I don't know if we want to touch more on that now because we kind of
yeah,
just briefly mentioned it,
yeah,
but I think, and it's kind of hard to discuss because, like we said, while that's taking place, there's like three other scenes going on,
yeah,
but I think that's such a highlight in the film because there was such a build up to it, and a lot of the emotional highs in this movie happen through those scenes with like Qui-Gon's death and Obi-Wan's promise to train Anakin. All of that like emotional both payoff and setup, that all happens because of the duel that they have. On top of it just being like super well choreographed and just like a great lightsaber duel, especially in comparison to like the stuff that we got in, the sequel
yeah,
trilogy.
yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of my notes was that yeah, I believe this is the best choreographed lightsaber duel that we've seen in Star Wars. I'm not sure where I would rank it in terms of Ahsoka and Darth Maul's fight in Clone Wars season 7. I I I think that is my favorite Star Wars fight in all of our movies and shows. So I'll have to sit on that one for a little bit, but I kind of want to talk about the significance of this battle. I'm sure most people know. I believe it was The Mandalorian. They had a little 6 episode series, I believe, after season one, or maybe it was season two. That I guess they had like a little round table and talked with all the directors, and Dave Filoni was there, and John Favreau was there, and Bryce Dallas Howard, Deborah Chow, and they talked about the Duel of the Fates and why it is so significant in Star Wars. So we have Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon. So we have an apprentice and a master in Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. The the Duel of the Fates is basically the duel, and I could be butchering all of this. I'm just gonna give it how I best remember. This duel is of the fate of Anakin Skywalker. If Qui-Gon wins, he trains Anakin, and Obi-Wan gets his own apprentice later down the line. Who knows? That's probably one of the best what ifs in all of Star Wars. What if Qui-Gon trained Anakin instead? Anakin could probably be the most powerful Jedi we've ever seen, all while never tempting turning to the bad side, the dark side. And then we have Anakin's fate with Obi-Wan, which we see play out. And this is all due to Darth Maul fighting off Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and basically who wins? Who wins the duel of the fates? Who wins the duel of the fate of Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one? And emotional weight wise, I'd probably put that up there with Anakin and Obi-Wan's fight in Revenge of the Sith, in terms of like the most significant duel we've seen in Star Wars for that reason.
Yeah. It does carry a lot of weight, and I think those questions are definitely there of like the what if, and I almost like wish that they would do like a what if Star Wars show,
Oh, yeah,
but you're right because immediately after Darth Maul kills Qui-Gon, I think that there's like a big change in Obi-Wan because he come becomes like a lot more rageful in that moment, especially
yeah,
like towards Darth Maul specifically. but even like making that promise of like I will train Anakin and he is the chosen one, like all those words that he really takes to heart, you have to wonder if like that almost pushed Obi-Wan to try too hard and how that could
Yeah,
have affected Anakin as well. So it's definitely that like that big what if question because there's so much that goes into it with the death of a master and now Obi-Wan suddenly taking up a Padawan but having to carry still the weight of like what Qui-Gon wanted after he passed.
yeah,
And it's hard to think of what would have happened, but it just shows the emotional significance that has been set up throughout the rest of this trilogy and the whole series ultimately, which is really cool to see that all played out just through a lightsaber duel because I'm pretty positive that at least in the main movies, is this the only time that we see two Jedi versus one Sith out? I guess we have Obi-Wan and Anakin versus we have them versus Count Dooku in episode 3
yes,
and episode 2. Episode 2 and 3, they actually have two duels with Count Dooku.
yeah,
So I'm mistaken on that, but it's interesting to see that emotional importance and actually bringing up that they had a duel at the end of episode 2 and they had one at the start of episode 3 with a Sith Lord. Now my what my mind is going towards, and this is just like an initial thought, but it might be
yeah,
a cool thing to discuss, is like you have Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon versus Darth Maul. That has a change in Obi-Wan. End of episode 2, Anakin versus and Obi-Wan versus Count Dooku. That also starts to change Anakin as well a lot with his hatred and everything and losing
mhm,
his hand and that significance. And that ties into the Count Dooku duel at the beginning of episode 3 where Anakin kills Count Dooku, and that all ties into the big finale of Anakin versus Obi-Wan at the end of episode 3. So it
yeah,
is kind of cool to think of that dynamic of these characters and how they related to the duels that like emotionally built on one another through this prequel trilogy, which is something that I had never thought about until I just brought it up. So what are your
yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and honestly, I mean, we're talking about, the road to Kenobi here, and touching on that thought, um, we can definitely see that being played out in the show. We can see Kenobi battling all that. I mean, he spent all this time on Tatooine watching over Luke. He's alone with his own thoughts. We can most definitely see him fighting through that and see that take a toll on him. Maybe he can even think back to his times with Anakin fighting Dooku, um, his time with Qui-Gon fighting Darth Maul, and we can kind of see what he really thought in those moments and how it's taken a toll on him in the future. So yeah, I can definitely see that playing in big time to the show.
And it's kind of crazy to think that Obi-Wan is the center of all of it. Like he was the one in
Yes.
Duel of the Fates that then potentially changed what happened with Anakin's life, and he was in all of the subsequent duels. And now they're about to have, the rematch of the century in the Kenobi show, and like
Yeah.
all of it started with the final battle in this episode and built up emotionally until what we're about to see within the next couple of months.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings up a good point. While I was watching the movie, I couldn't help but think that this is just as much Obi-Wan's story as it is Anakin's. George Lucas said Star Wars is the story of Anakin Skywalker. It's all about Anakin. But rewatching Phantom Menace and knowing how these next couple episodes play out, leading up to Empire Strikes Back, and even Return of the Jedi. Yes, this is very much Obi Wan's story as well. These prequel episodes, just as much as it is Anakin. So, which is a big reason why we decided to watch these in preparation for the Kenobi show. So, yeah,
Yeah, and
that's a good point.
I think it started with the duel really because
Yeah,
Obi-Wan, like I noticed he took a back seat throughout a lot of this episode. Like, when the pod race was happening, he didn't even go with Qui-Gon into the heart of Tatooine to meet up with Anakin.
yeah,
Like he was very much a side character. And then it's really just like after Qui-Gon died, now like that's when it switches, and that's what the big turning point is, and he becomes like such a significant character for the rest of the series.
Yeah, and honestly, if you think about it, we the audience, we're kind of Anakin Skywalker at that moment. You know, all we know is Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon's there for us. Qui-Gon's our main character until the moment Darth Maul kills him. From here on out, it's very much Obi-Wan's story just as much as it is Anakin's story. So you can kind of see it played out as that. You know, we're Anakin Skywalker. We're watching through the eyes of him in a way. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Um, one more, well, not one more, but I did want to touch on this. The Gungan battle, as bad as the cinematography was, as horrible as it was, I can't help but notice, and I remember having this thought the first time I watched this movie. It's very similar, I guess, in a way, to Infinity War's big battle in Wakanda, if you think about it. And I remember watching this, and that's all I could think about. And I don't know, I haven't read any reports, I haven't seen anything saying that Infinity War or Marvel took inspiration from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But I have a few things, and I want you to give me your thoughts on if you think um, this makes sense. So we see the big dome force field, right? The big dome surround all of our heroes and kind of protect them. Also on top of this big green landscape, right?
Mm.
So we see that, and then we see their the Gungans at one point. They have like these arm shields that they
Yeah.
ignite, and it looks exactly like what the Wakandans do in Infinity War. And then yeah, the big grassy um, landscape that they're fighting on. I don't know. It's just a lot of things reminding me big time of Infinity War, and also one other element is they essentially have lost. They're done. Everyone's getting handcuffed, walking until some big thing happens. And in this case, it was Anakin Skywalker taking down the ship. And in Infinity War's case, it was Thor coming down and wreaking havoc on everyone. So, what do you think about that?
I've never thought of it, and I didn't think of it when rewatching the movie. I think there are definitely elements of it, even just the fact of like the droid army can be related extremely well to whatever those like four-armed dog-like creatures were in Infinity
Yeah,
War, where they're just kind of like they're all generic, they're all the same, they're not special type of thing, and they're just kind of throwaways. And you're right about a lot of the other elements of it, and I think that there could have been elements that maybe took inspiration, but the reason why I would be a little hesitant is because in order for that to have been the case in Infinity War, then they would have had to consciously made those decisions when making Black Panther, setting up, you know, the shield and some of the like Wakandan weapons that are used, because those things were set up previously before the battle took place. So maybe took inspiration, but I feel like there was too much underlying foundation where I don't think Marvel would have like said, "Oh, the Phantom Menace did this. This is kind of cool. Let's base that around how technology works in the Black Panther movie eventually to have this battle type of
yeah,
thing." But
yeah,
you're right that they share a lot of similarities for
yeah,
sure, and it's interesting because yeah, Anakin almost was like Thor in Wakanda, but one felt very warranted, where one felt a little bit less warranted, in
yeah,
my opinion.
yeah,
That was something that I wanted to bring up was, so I'm sure you know that a big criticism of the sequel trilogy was Rey just being able to use the Force and have abilities and be able to do the things that she did very quickly.
yeah,
And I almost felt that watching this movie was like they criticized Rey for that, but like with Anakin, that happened like quite a bit throughout this film where he was just able to do stuff, and their excuse was he's Force sensitive. So I'm
yeah.
curious what you think about that, like stuff that we're seeing now in modern Star Wars that's being criticized, but that was already happening all the way back in this first episode.
Yeah. Um, I can definitely see that now that you've brought it up. One of my big points on here was I loved Anakin in this movie. I thought he was amazing. I thought he was a wholesome young boy that was so selfless and just wanted to help. I do agree that he does kind of share the same criticisms that Ray got. One being him just taking off with the starfighter, the Naboo starfighter, and just wreaking havoc on everyone. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, this. I believe, how old is he? 12? No, I think George Lucas wanted him to be around 12 or 16, but ultimately brought his age down to give him leaving his mom more emotional weight. But I mean, either way, dude just hops in a spaceship and starts blowing things up and ultimately saves the day. So yeah, I can definitely see that. I might be biased though because I am the biggest Anakin Skywalker fan ever. So he's my favorite Star Wars character. So, but I do agree with that. I didn't quite catch it in the movie, but now that you said something about it, because I did have a problem with the whole Naboo scene when he goes up in the ship. So now that you brought it up, I guess yeah, that's exactly why I had a problem with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was one other thing that I noticed that was similar where it's like there are things that have happened in modern day Star Wars that get heavily criticized, but then I've never heard it criticized about past Star Wars films. And in this movie, I think there were two or three instances where I noticed the unnecessary spin during a fight.
Oh wow,
And
really?
do you remember when I think it was the final episode of the Book of Boba Fett came
Oh
out,
yeah.
and there was the character who did the spin, and everybody was seriously nagging on the show for what that like creative choice, because they're like, this is so pointless. But I seriously, like, there were a couple of times throughout this episode where I noticed it, and I was like, it's interesting because it's really just a staple of Star Wars, to be honest. Like, it happens throughout the entire series, and yet if it happens now, like modern day, people are going to criticize it way, way more for no real reason. So I did notice that a couple of times, which was interesting.
Nice. I never caught any unnecessary spins. Do you have like a specific example?
Oh, I wrote it down when it happened, but I didn't write down the specific scene. I'm trying to remember. I think there was at least one during Duel of the Fates that Obi-Wan did towards the beginning of the fight.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds, yeah, I think I remember seeing something like that now that you bring that up. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
and
a
I
lot of
think there was
sense.
I think it might have just been two, but I think there was one other character that did one at some point. I'm not sure exactly when that was. I definitely now remember the Obi-Wan spin though. So, but hey, I it didn't take away from the movie because I
Yeah.
don't like mind the whole unnecessary spin thing. I just thought it was an interesting thing to bring up of like sometimes there are things that have happened in these old movies that aren't criticized that are now in modern Star Wars.
Yeah, I think a lot of that also has to do with social media nowadays. I mean, Rise of Skywalker and Book of Boba Fett both came out fairly recently, um, but I'm pretty sure some people had discussions like this in 1999. And I'm fairly certain a lot did, considering how critics reacted to the Phantom Menace. So I think we're hearing a lot about it now because of social media. I think if we had what we had, let's say Episode One came out, today. I think there'd be a lot of complaints with the movie. So yeah, I guess to play devil's advocate real quick, kind of switching topics here. I caught something um, fairly cool. I want to say about 4 or 5 times where something happens and the Force theme is playing behind it. And so at first I was just like, okay, like I had in my notes at first, like, oh, the Force theme is very satisfying. It's one of the most iconic, themes across all movies. And I left it at that for a bit. And then I noticed certain spots where it came up, and I'll name off a few right now, and then I'll explain my reasoning for bringing this up. Obi-Wan kills Darth Maul. The Force theme plays in the background. When Anakin leaves his mom, Anakin in front of the council, getting told or getting tested in front of Yoda and Mace Windu, and at Qui Gon's funeral. And those are just a couple of times. There's some other times where you hear the Force theme being played. And this could be a reach. This is just I'm just putting this out there. But could this be like the Force saying, "Hey, this is me right here. This is what I want. I'm doing this. To kind of push everything along, push everything into motion because we know Anakin's the chosen one. If we disregard the sequels, we see him bring balance back to the Force. He kills Palpatine and Luke wins, and the Force is balanced. So this is what I'm getting is that the Force knows what's going to happen. The Force has everyone in this movie on a set path. Um, Qui-Gon meets Anakin. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan meet Anakin because of the Force. Qui-Gon dies because of the Force. The Force wants it. And if anyone's ever thought or wondered what Qui-Gon had to say about Anakin's death, I believe there's a book. I did not read it. I just heard this somewhere. I believe there's a book, and Obi-Wan asks him what he thinks about Anakin's fall to the dark side, and all Qui-Gon has to say is it's the way of the Force. The Force is going to do what the Force wants to do. So hearing the Force theme in these significant moments in the movie, do you think that's kind of the Force saying, "Hey, this is a big spot, and this is going to be essential for what goes on down the road"?
Yeah, I think with every spot that you mentioned, all of those things have some sort of future emotional or just in general impact on Anakin or his training with Obi-Wan. Every single one of those moments has some sort of connection in that way. And so I think yeah, it could just it might I don't know if there is that like deeper level of they intentionally placed it in those spots because it's like the Force, or if it's just, the creative team behind making the movie almost saying like this is foreshadowing in a way. And maybe those are
Yeah,
one and the same. Maybe the foreshadowing is still the Force that is, it's almost alive in those scenes.
yeah,
So I don't think that that's like too much of a reach to say that like they were very intentional about when it was used and the
yeah,
the future impact that those scenes would have all surrounding our character of Anakin.
yeah, yeah. It was just something I caught. I thought it was pretty cool. The way I've always understood the Force, and I could be totally wrong, the way I've always understood the Force is that I guess everyone has a predetermined like destiny. You know, the Force knows where this person's gonna go and how their story will end, and this person and this person. So I just connected those dots on my own. So could be a reach, could be my mastermind at work, but either way is very very cool scenes, and that was very satisfying to hear the Force theme being brought up in very key moments of Anakin's story. One thing I noticed fairly early into the movie, I guess I have two kind of things to state on this. Padme's decoy, the fake queen of Naboo, one, she looks exactly like Natalie Portman. And another thing is, I didn't realize that Natalie Portman was only 16 when this movie was being made. And I found a fun fact that she was very like stressed shooting this movie, mainly because they used a lot of CGI and stand-ins, and she wasn't used to that at this time. But she was also still in high school and while shooting the movie. And she also missed the premiere of episode one due to having to study for some final exams for her high school. So what do you think about that?
Whoa, I had no idea. Wow. Cuz
Yeah.
the thing that I've always known that's been a criticism kind of relating to her character is the fact that she was flirtatious with a kid, which is still a little strange.
Yeah.
It's still a little strange, like
Yeah.
to be totally honest, but like I had no idea that she was that young during the filming of this movie because that still doesn't make her even that old now, like mid 30s or whatever, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, I had no clue about that. And dang, I couldn't imagine. What stands out to me is like, I'm not able to fathom being like an actor or an actress in something like Star Wars and still like being in school, like
Yeah.
how does that even come about? where that happens. Those things just like don't work together in my mind, because most child actors nowadays, once they get their big role, like they're just actors, you know, they don't go to school anymore, a lot of them. I
Yeah.
think of like the Stranger Things cast. I know some of them are, you know, pursuing like an education, but like for a lot of them, they found their in with Hollywood and they're celebrities now. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear that, because I don't feel like that's something that we hear often, is like we do hear about celebrities' lives pretty often, but not usually like something like this where it was a 16-year-old who still had to finish up high school. That's crazy to think about. That's wild.
Yeah, I read that and I was taken back. I can't imagine shooting a movie as big as Star Wars while also having classes and homework. Like as soon as I read that, I just kept thinking like, well, did they only let her shoot like on the weekends or from the hours of like 5 to 10? Like I just it's pretty crazy though, and it shows that she was on that grind. So that was very cool to read.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and then she would have done Attack of the Clones just a couple years later, right after graduating high school. So she must have been 19 during Attack of the Clones, which is still wild to think about, because she does not seem like a 19-year-old in Attack of the Clones.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's some talent right there. It takes some talent and some hard work, and so yeah, that was an interesting read. I'm excited to see the rest of these movies, see if I can kind of um, find anything else about her, find anything else out, and read some more about if she was doing college while making Attack of the Clones or something. So
Yeah.
um, I did kind of just to change subjects here, talk about our real villain of the movie, Palpatine, how he played both sides of the politics aspect and the war aspect. So I kind of found myself like not rooting for him, but kind of like he had my respect this movie because of how like how what's the word?
Manipulative?
Yeah, let's go with that. How
Okay.
manipulative and how big and how well thought out his plan was. There we go. Because it seems like everything that happened kind of happened exactly how he thought it would. And one of the best scenes I think in the movie is seeing Yoda and Mace Windu talk about, well, who did we kill, the master or the apprentice? And it kind of just zooms out, and you just see Palpatine at Qui-Gon's funeral, knowing that everything is going according to plan, and especially knowing how all of this plays out later on down the road. Did you have any thoughts on that, or have any moments where you were just kind of you kind of forgot that Palpatine was the master behind all this?
Well, from my experience going throughout this film, I feel like because we already know where things end up, they tried to make it very obvious that like they were setting up Anakin to be Vader and they were setting up Palpatine to be Emperor Palpatine. I think like that, even that zoom out, I was just like, it, if we didn't know that that was the case, that shot might not have been in the movie. You know, if this was like they were trying to hide that reveal from us. So it almost reminded me of part of the discussion that we had recently about Sonic 2, which was with, I think it was about how like, I'm trying to remember exactly how we discussed it, but it's essentially this idea of like, if you, with Tails being in the post credit scene of the first one and then all over the marketing in the second one, does it undermine the post credit scene type of thing? Where in this it's like, since we know that he's going to become Emperor Palpatine and we know how it ends, does that undermine some of the setup that they're trying to do with this movie, where they're trying to drop the subtle hints of him being Emperor Palpatine? And I found myself like, I did want to believe that, what you're saying of like forgetting that he's Emperor Palpatine, because I shouldn't know at this point, but I found it hard because I feel like the movie was like really trying to push that just for the setup, and because people already knew that that was going to be the case.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And on that topic of like knowing the outcome, that also was, I guess, kind of a good thing. Um, to put it at that, because it was hard to watch sometimes, knowing where these characters go, like Revenge of the Sith. We see Yoda talking to Obi-Wan at one of the final scenes, and he says, "Your apprentice Skywalker will be," and even Anakin and Obi-Wan meeting for the first time. Like when Qui-Gon introduces Anakin to Obi-Wan, and Anakin is like taken back, and he's like, "Oh my God, you're a Jedi too," and Qui-Gon just like sits back and laughs. It was a feel good moment, but then you kind of think, and you're like, oh wow, like I know how this is gonna end, and it's just kind of like a, oh man, it's bittersweet. And so I guess I'll ask this: knowing what we know, did that kind of make this watch better, or kind of like you said, undermine a lot of things for you? And if it was like kind of split, what are some examples of that?
I feel like it definitely was split because you're right that a lot of the political stuff I think was handled really well for him, how he was able to kind of like even though he's a Sith Lord, he was able to infest the political system and do that only with his knowledge instead of using like the Force or his lightsaber skills. Like he did that all with like a completely separate set of skills that we're not used to Sith or Jedi using at that point. And so
Yeah.
I did appreciate a lot of that stuff. I think there was just like a few of those moments where I feel like they were trying to make it a little too obvious. Like that shot at the end was the one that stood out probably the most. Um, or just even some of like the hologram communications that he had where he would talk about the queen or the negotiations and stuff like that. It was very obvious that the Sith Lord who we didn't know about, Emperor Palpatine, that he was Senator Palpatine based on just like the insider information that he had about what was going on in the political sphere. So it was almost like a double edged sword, where it's like the political stuff was good, but then Emperor Palpatine knowing about the political stuff also kind of like took away from it a little bit. So I definitely would say it was a balance of that.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. I feel the same way. Um, there is some really cool like little Easter eggs looking back on it. Like when I can't remember exactly when it was. I think the decoy queen is talking to Palpatine, and he's kind of having a meeting with everyone, and they lose signal of his transmitter, and his voice kind of like goes real deep. It's like and then cuts out, and it does sound like Palpatine. It sounds like he's someone evil. It's an evil voice, and watching that, knowing the outcome, yeah, that was a pretty cool catch too. Was there any other scenes besides the ones we've mentioned that they kind of? I mean, I know he had very little screen time, but if there's any you can think of.
I don't think there's anything else that stands out. I feel like he had a much more prominent role in the first like half to two-thirds of the movie, but towards the end they didn't really focus on him too much. So I feel like yeah, he didn't have too much involvement overall. So nothing else really comes to mind when it comes to his scenes.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. We'll have a lot to talk about in regards to him in these next two episodes, especially episode three, and I'm very excited for that. Was there anything? I have two more like kind of questions, kind of closers. But if there's anything else that you had written down that you want to bring up, I'm all for it.
I had one last thing. I think we touched on everything else, but during the end celebration scene where we had like Obi-Wan and Anakin and Jar Jar and all of them kind of lined up when they presented the like orb to I'm gonna butcher his
Gungan.
name, but the Gungan leader, yeah, him.
Yeah,
When they presented that, something that I noticed was there was a ton of different Jedi in the background. Like Mace Windu was there, and there was a bunch of other ones, and I don't know all of their names. I think one of them was like it's like is it say Ceci Tin or something like that. Like there was a lot of Jedi, and I'm pretty
yeah.
sure there was even one Jedi who like was mainly predominant in like the Clone Wars. Like I don't even know if is in the next couple of episodes, and I know we have a ton of Jedi, coming in
Yeah.
the next couple of episodes, but
Yeah.
like I noticed characters like one of them that's I'm pretty sure one of the characters who's involved in the Palpatine arrest in episode 3. I'm pretty sure one of the Jedi
Oh,
was there at the celebration as well. So like characters who I noticed who I'm like I don't recognize them from another Star Wars movie. I recognize them from the Clone Wars, which was
yeah.
interesting. And I just like picked up on it because I'm like, yeah, I know them, but not from another Star Wars show. Um,
Yeah.
so that was interesting. But again, just a small detail that like I thought of when I was finishing up the movie.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of those. Star Wars has tended to do that over the years. Grab like some background characters and decide to have them, have prominent roles throughout their shows. So that's one thing that I love about it. You can see someone pop up, and most of the times I'll be like, "Who is this person?" And then I'll watch like a review or a breakdown, and I'll be like, "Okay, they're way more important than I thought they were." So, um, or way less important than I thought they could have just been a background character, an extra in another movie that comes back, and now they have a big role. So you never know with Star Wars. That's a upside to having a universe as big as it does.
Yeah.
So I guess with some closing statements right here. What would you rate the movie out of 10?
Ooh, this is tough. This is really hard because I feel like it is very nostalgic for me. While I primarily grew up on 2 and 3 when I was like, I don't know, around the age of like 10 or so, like when I was really really young, this was the movie that I watched the most for Star Wars. I My grandma had it on she had it on VHS, and me and my
Wow.
cousin would watch it over and over and over. We loved it. And so I feel like I have a lot of nostalgia for this one, but I feel like as I've grown up, I've become more realistic with like my ratings and everything. So I think upon this viewing, I would rate it lower than I like originally would have placed it. And like I don't know, maybe this rating is a hot take. I go between it's kind of hard to pick. I go between like either a 5 or a 6 out of 10
Okay.
for me.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to probably put it probably at a low 7. A low 7. There was a lot of things I liked about it, and like I said, Anakin's my favorite character in all of Star Wars. Um, but this is also very much Obi-Wan's story, and we get to kind of see like the the pieces of the puzzle start getting put together here. So I thought that was really cool. There is some big downsides to the movie, but overall it's a solid movie. It's solid. Definitely the weaker of the three. Um, and if we're going 1 through 6, I'd probably say the weakest. Uh, if we're going 1 through 9, definitely not. It's probably middle of the packs. But where would you put it amongst other Star Wars movies?
I mean I'm interested for my rewatch of Attack of the Clones because I've always thought of this one a little higher than that, so I'm not sure what my thoughts will be after rewatching it. Definitely it doesn't touch anything in the original trilogy, and yeah, I think it's a pretty big toss up with specifically 8 and 9
Yeah,
depending on, how I know people have such different views on those films, but I found this one to be a little bit less rewatchable than some of the newer ones. And not to say like it's a worse movie, but like just with how they made them modern, like the new Star Wars movies, I just
yeah,
find them easier to digest and like more structured. Like I said, the pacing for this one was like my biggest issue,
yeah,
whereas like I find it easier to follow along with some of the newer stuff. So I think it's harder. I'd really have to like rewatch this whole franchise to determine that. But I would say like if we're looking at just like all the films they've made, including all the spin-offs and everything, it's still like on the lower side for me.
interesting. Yeah, I definitely agree. And we started this series as the road to Kenobi. So with my final question, I'll tie it back to that. What is I guess number one is kind of a gimme. So I'll give me two. I'll say give me two characters that you would want to see. I guess from this movie in Obi-Wan, and something that you would like to see called back from this movie in the Kenobi series.
Ooh, okay. I feel like my answer kind of almost ties together with one another. I would love to see Qui-Gon return in some way, shape, or form. I feel like it would more likely be like a Force ghost than it would be like him actually returning. I know that Liam Neeson did say he would return to the Star Wars franchise, and for some reason in the interview, he's just like, if it was a movie, I would return, which seemed weird because he knows about the
Yeah,
show. It seemed strange. So I feel like he could have some sort of involvement, and that my second character that ties into the callback would be Maul, which I know he was at one point going to be a big part of the Kenobi show
yeah,
until he was almost entirely cut out. But I think like the dynamic between Qui-Gon and Maul and how all that ties into Obi-Wan, that's just like the perfect trio to bring back, in my opinion, for this movie specifically. I feel like that's kind of, it might be the obvious answer, but like I feel
no,
like
yeah,
that's the most warranted, like emotionally, for the Kenobi show.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It is the um, one of the most obvious. I mean, people love Qui Gon. We love Qui Gon over here. Um, I would definitely want to see him back, and I also would not mind seeing Darth Maul back. However, they can do that, and it could even be a flashback. I know the continuity wouldn't really match up with Rebels, but it could even be a flashback. We could see a Force Ghost Qui Gon. We could see flashbacks with Qui Gon and Anakin. Um, and yeah, a big callback would I would really want to see the Duel of the Fates being called back. It'd be really cool to see Obi-Wan kind of start connecting those dots, saying, "Well, what if this fight, would have went a bit different? Would would everything be completely? Would I have ever interacted with Anakin? Would anything have gone the way it did at all?" So I would definitely like to see that. And I mean, you're sitting in the desert for 10 years. You got nothing but heat around you, sand. Your mind's gonna start torturing you. So I hope we get to see a little bit of that. Um, Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing these days?
Yeah, I am mainly on TikTok. Our account is Aspire Entertainment, and we talk a lot about the newest stuff with like Marvel, Star Wars now, especially with Kenobi coming up. We also do like YouTube podcasts and everything. That's part of the reason why we wanted to hop on together, is because we just love talking about these things. And TikTok, the unfortunate thing is that it doesn't allow for these like lengthier discussions and everything. It's a lot harder to have that connection. So something like this is just, it's a lot of fun to do, and I'm looking forward to doing this. Like, I guess we're doing it basically once a week to get through this trilogy before the Kenobi show comes out.
Yeah,
I'm excited to do that, to kind of to follow along with this journey, like you said, of both Anakin and Obi-Wan as we get towards the show. So I'm just very glad to be here and have this discussion. I think it's gonna be really fun over the next few weeks as we come up on the Kenobi show, which is soon. It's actually
yeah,
really soon, which I'm
yeah.
I'm excited. So I'm just glad to be here to have this discussion.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm definitely excited for Kenobi. Mainly excited to see my boy Hayden Christensen back. I've been waiting, and the day's about to come. So yeah, I have actually done a podcast episode with Ben on his podcast, Aspire Entertainment, I believe on Spotify,
Yeah.
or is it Aspire Podcast, or what is it?
It's called the Aspire Podcast, but you can
Okay,
find it just as easily just by searching up Aspire Entertainment.
exactly. So we did do a podcast about Sonic 2 on there. Please go check that out. Please check out all his socials. I do believe this will be going up on YouTube if all goes well, and maybe even an audio version on Spotify. And I'll probably be posting some highlights of this on my TikTok. Aiden H Talks everywhere. Ben, just look up Spire Entertainment. Give him some love, and yeah, we will most likely be seeing y'all next week for episode 2, Attack of the Clones. I'm personally excited. I like Attack of the Clones. I mean, it's a very fun action packed movie, and I mean, we get our Padawan Anakin with his
Yes.
long slash short hair. So I think it'll be really fun. And then in weeks after, most likely episode 3. So should be a fun next couple of weeks. And then we got the Kenobi series rolling and big things coming. So again, Ben, thank you for joining. Thank you for um, convincing me to do this and getting me off my butt to finally start getting my podcast rolling. Any other last words?
Yeah, just thank you for having me. I'll be here, to keep talking all these amazing topics, and it's a blast. So I'm glad we did this.
Awesome, man. And with that, we will sign out. Thank you for listening. I will see y'all later. Peace.